actually goes all the way back to 2010. That was the first year we did La Llorona.
Yeah, buddy.
And then, of course, we had the La Llorona Mazes 2011, 2012, 2013. We teamed up with Dan Trejo to do El Cucuy. And then kind of the second phase began. We started working with Latin American film directors. It started with Robert Rodriguez on his TV series From Dusk Till Dawn. And then Guillermo del Toro. Doing Crimson Peak, and then 7 years. 7 years went by where we didn't really do that. We moved on to other things, we started doing other opportunities, and then coming out of 2021, I noticed the plaza, the Universal Plaza, the way we themed that around Day of the Dead, and I noticed everybody inside it, and something in my brain just clicked that year, and I went, we gotta get back to this. This is what we should be doing. And so, last year, we brought back La Llorona, the Weeping Woman. So it feels like it's time for something else.
Yeah, buddy.
The legends and myths of Latin America at Halloween Horror Nights continues with Monstros, the monsters of Latin America.
Woo-hoo-hoo, yeah, never go wrong, man.
Study this real well, there's going to be a quiz at the end, okay? So, what is this? This is an all-new haunted house that features 3 infamous monsters, or monstros, which is Spanish for monsters, of Latin America. What's wrong with this picture? Somebody really screwed up. I'm going to explain that in just a second. But this is something I want to do today. I've been doing this show as the team said, I've been doing it every single year, that there's been a Midsummer Scream and Scare Alley before that. So I'm always up here, I'm always the spokesperson for the event. I'm always doing all the media and the press, but the reality is there are hundreds, literally hundreds of talented men and women that work on this event, right? I don't create this by myself. It takes everybody's passion, everybody's hard work, everybody's dedication. So as we're going through this presentation today, and he wasn't kidding, I don't know how to edit, so I was making this, back in Ireland, and I was like, oh, it'd be cool to talk about that. Oh, it'd be cool to talk about that. And I just went, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's just put everything in it. But I did want to point out, right off the bat, right at the top of the presentation, an individual named Rose Gonzalez. And Rose Gonzalez works with our marketing department. So back in 2010, when we first decided to do La Llorona, I'll be totally honest with you, I did not grow up with La Llorona. That's not a story I was told as a kid. So I really needed to do my research. We take our research very, very, very seriously at Halloween Horror Nights, no matter what we're doing, whether it's a movie, a television show, an original house, we do a ton of research. But I've always used Rose as my touchstone for things that have to do with our Latin American houses. And now this year I've been working with Universal Studios Hollywood's DEI team. We'll give it up for them as well. Do you know what DEI stands for? Diversity, equity, inclusion. Should have been diversity, inclusion, equity, because then it would have been die, and that would have been a lot cooler for a horror event. But they've been a big help to me as well. And back in the days of La Llorona, we turned to our partners at Telemundo. We turned to actors. We worked with Diego Luna, and he helped us out with La Llorona. When we were doing El Cucuy, it was Danny Trejo. So this team had a big impact on everything you're about to see, because I'm going to walk you through a little bit of this house. Let's meet the Monstros. We'll start with our first one, and this is, I'll give anybody a penny if you can pronounce this name. Anybody? Tlalhupuchi. Tlalhupuchi. This is a character that comes from the Tlaxcala region of Mexico, and it's really interesting because it's a witch, but it's also a vampire. And with any of these Latin American myths and legends, they're all passed down orally for hundreds of years. In fact, Tlalopuchi, some people think the origins of the story go back to Aztec times. That's how old it is. But I'll give you the version that's the most common version, right? Because there are variations to the story. But in the most common version, anybody can be a Tlalopuchi. Could be you, could be you, could be you. You don't know when you're a little kid that you're a Tlalopuchi until you reach puberty. And then things start to change, as they do. And you become aware that you are, in fact, a Tlalopuchi. So a Tlalopuchi has to do a very, very specific ceremony, and then it transforms into one of a series of animals. But the most common one is a turkey vulture. And it flies to the house of its victim, and it sucks the blood out of them. It doesn't bite them like a vampire. It sucks the blood through the skin, and it leaves these telltale bruises and markings. So Tlalopuchi is the first of our monsters. And I'll give you a little facts as we go along. It came out of the research we did on this house. As late as the 1950s, there was a particular doctor in Mexico who was trying to figure out why the infant mortality rates were so high in this particular region where this story originates. And he pulled all these death certificates, and he was doing his research and he was studying, and he noticed that cause of death, all the parents were writing on it, Tlalopuchi, or witch. So that's what first brought this story to larger attention. The last known execution of a Tlalopuchi was 1973. Monsters are real. Let's meet our next one. Actually, let's take a look at the character design for Tlalopuchi. So this is our iteration of Tlalopuchi. We kind of have two different versions going on here. The one you see in the white dress, it's more pale skin. That's a brand new Tlalopuchi, just started feeding. The one you see in the red, that's a Tlalopuchi that's been around for a while and has ingested a lot of blood. And I should say there are male Tlalopuchis and there are female Tlalopuchis. But we're going with the female Tlalopuchis because they are stronger than the males. Girl dad. Our next monster is La Lechuza. Some of you were right on the internet. I think you're doing La Lechuza. I have no idea how you got that, but you were right. La Lechuza, also known as the Owl Witch, okay? And this comes from all over Mexico, but it also comes from the southwestern United States, particularly Texas. And I'll give you again the most common iteration of the story. There's an old woman who lives in a village. She's the kind of old woman that people whisper about, and people become convinced that she's a witch, so they put her to death. But she comes back as La Lechuza. So she's a combination old woman and a witch. And there's one particular thing the La Lechuza does that's extremely creepy. And again, you can go on the internet and read all about this. There's endless Reddit pages about people's encounters with La Lechuzas. But one thing that it does is late at night, if you're in your house and you hear a baby crying, don't go outside. Because the La Lechuza can disguise its voice to sound like an infant crying. And then when you go out of the house to see what's going on, it swoops down and picks you up. Monstro fact. In 1975, a town in South Texas, and this is documented in the press, was terrorized by a La Lechuza. People started seeing it, they saw it flying overhead, they started calling into their local radio stations. There's even actually a song written about this that was released called La Lechuza. We're not using it in the house because it's kind of silly. But it was a huge big deal. And this is what they eventually found. Two boys made this and stuck it up in a tree, and they kept moving it around into different trees. And this is a bit ever. I need to hire those two kids for Horror Nights. Because we did stuff like that when we were kids. Did you guys do stuff like this? We used to rig dummies through a tree and make it so somebody would be walking down the street late at night and it would just suddenly stand up right in front of them. Don't do that, by the way. I remember being chased through a field by somebody when I was a kid. But the weird thing about this story is Okay, so they saw it in a tree. It doesn't explain why so many people saw it flying overhead, and they described it as this huge bird. So monsters are real. And this is our design for La Lechuza. And that brings us to our third and possibly last monster, and that is El Silban. I bet you didn't figure this one out, right? Nobody? Okay. El Silban, which translates to the Whistler, is from the Los Llanos region of Colombia, Venezuela, and it's another great story. Different iterations of the story, I'll give you the most common one. So there's a boy, which is really like a late teenager boy, living on a farm, fairly well off. He falls in love with a woman that the father does not approve of. The father tells him, get rid of this woman, but he's in love and he doesn't get rid of him. So one day the father comes into the barn and he catches the boy and the girl, and he flies into a rage and he murders the girl. Kills her right in front of the son. The son flies into a rage and murders his father. And then granddad comes home, sees what's been done, and he takes the boy out to the field, ties him to a post, whips him repeatedly with a whip until the flesh falls off his back. Then he takes like limes and like tequila and pours it in the wounds. And if that wasn't bad enough, then he sets wild dogs upon him that rip him to shreds. And as this horribly mutilated guy is stumbling towards the woods, the grandfather comes up to him and hands him the sack of his father's bones, his murdered father's bones, and says, you are condemned for all time to carry the bones of your murdered father on your back. And he disappears into the woods and he's not seen again. And then eventually this creature comes out of the woods that is now known as El Silban. And it's a towering creature. Some say he's like 10, 12 feet tall. Really, really skinny, carrying the bones of his murdered father on his back. And he's known for his distinctive whistle that kind of rises and falls. If you hear this whistle and it sounds far away, that means El Silban is actually really close. But if you hear the whistle and it sounds close, that actually means he's far away. So we'll give you a monstro fact about El Silban. Aside from the distinctive whistle that gives him his name, he is said to prey primarily on womanizers, and drunks. You're all screwed. You're not making it out of this haunted house, apparently. All right, let's take a look at our design for El Silban. So obviously we're doing him as a still walker in key scenes. And let's get into some environments and the inspiration for said environments. And again, I'm gonna do some team member appreciation. My longtime creative partner on Halloween Horror Nights, Mr. Chris Williams. Chris is our art director, he's our production designer. Since 2006, Chris and I conceive everything, all of the houses for Halloween Horror Nights together. We do it as a team, we always have. But working with Chris, who's been his right-hand woman since the very beginning, as well as Brandy Creason, who's our production design manager. And Brandy and Chris, and a staple of really talented production designers from Hollywood films and television, they manage that entire team every year, drawing every single wall and every single house by hand. And their work is invaluable to the success of Halloween Horror Nights. I come up with the written word, and then they translate it into what it visually looks like. And I'm gonna show you a little bit about what they've been up to lately. We're gonna start with the setting for this house. When we were thinking about where to set this particular house, being that it's a new original house, we wanted to create a really iconic place to kind of ground the house in. So I started doing research. I did endless research, pulled hundreds and hundreds of images, but these two images in particular really stuck with me, and this is really what Brandy and Chris really latched onto as well. They're graveyards in Mexico, one's from Guadalajara, one's from Guanajuato, but I really liked, in the long kind of rectangular image, that Gothic Mexican architecture of that mausoleum. We thought that was a really cool element, and then the other one that I really liked was the idea of these sealed crypts that you see in the other image. So we created this place that we call the Cemetery of the Lost. And the idea here is that this is the place where every one of the victims of these monsters are buried. And it is a forsaken, condemned place that you do not go at night because the weather is always bad. It's always thunder and lightning here. Once your relatives are buried there, you never go back to visit them. This is just where they live. This is the elevation, the color elevation for the facade. You know, it's funny. I see what you guys say a lot of times, on Twitter and whatnot. And I saw this one guy and he goes, I think that's a mausoleum, right? And this other guy goes, that's impossible. There's no such thing as a two-story mausoleum. Two-story mausoleum. And if you could peek over the fence right now, this is what you'd see. This is the mausoleum being built right now. This was taken about a week ago. We're just getting into the vine work. But if you look at the front, it looks kind of empty. And it's not going to be empty. There's a lot more coming. This is another piece of inspiration. I love these mourning statues that we found in these cemeteries in Guanajuato and thought that was a really cool element. So I'm going to give you like the down view. This is the ground plan looking down, and that's a side elevation of the facade. You see the big, like above ground crypt with the statue, but you see something else. And this is going to get back to that piece of key art at the beginning. You see the guy standing there holding a shovel? Okay. We thought it would be cool to create our own original character to add to this mix. And this character would be like the narrator of the experience. He is the caretaker of the cemetery, and when we were trying to conceive what he should look like, we were really thinking about like traditional looks for the Grim Reaper. So I pulled all this research. These are just a few of the images. Does everybody know what photograph is? And don't say Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Does anybody know who that actor is? Very famous in a very famous horror movie. Max von Sydow, who plays the priest in The Exorcist. This is Max von Sydow back in the 1950s in a foreign film called The Seventh Seal, where he plays death. So we pulled that image. Then we pulled images from Aztec culture. We pulled images from the Middle Ages. We pulled images from the Renaissance, all different iterations of death, put it into our mind blender, and then came up with this. So, this guy actually doesn't have a name. We never like officially named him. In our mind, it's kind of like those Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. Like he's always the man with no name who comes to the town and you never know what his real name is. So he's kind of our man with no name. But we were thinking, Chris and I, when we were working on this, we're like, well, that's just gonna get annoying after a while. We're gonna be in meetings and they're like, okay, we're talking about wardrobe for the man with no name, and we'd have to say that over and over and over again. So we just call him Muerte, which is Spanish for death. And he is going to be the guy you meet out in front. He's the pre-show, if you will, for this haunted house. He's going to be telling you the story about these three monsters. And he's designed with an articulated jaw so that the actor wearing the mask can lip sync to track. And you're going to see he's kind of the bookends of the haunted house as well. So when we came up with this idea for the cemetery, we thought, well, this is cool. This will be like the portal that you go through that transports you to all the world of these different monsters. So this is when you step through that crypt. Again, I want to point out, two-story. I just feel like I have to validate that guy because he was right. He like nailed it right out of the gate. So you enter this two-story mausoleum, and there's all these rotting skeletons of all the people that are buried inside that you have to go through. And I kind of snuck a pic the other day. I like the guy in the middle. I'm obsessed with him now. I saw these pictures were coming in from the field, and I'm like, who's that guy? I'm gonna call him Bruno. We don't talk about Bruno. He's just like, and the guy behind him was just like, hey, let me see. He's just like, no, Bruno has to look now. So this is the transition, and there's bats roosting in the upper niches, and there's animation and LED bat eyes. And as you go through this, you come to the first in a series of crypt paintings. And this is another thing we pulled from our research. This is an old Aztec tomb painting. But we thought it would be really cool if we used artwork, which is the same artwork you guys just saw in the key art, but did it in the style of like crypt paintings that would introduce you to each different area that you're going to. So this is the crypt painting for Tlahupuchi. And then we also have crypt paintings for the other two monsters as well, La Lechuza and Del Subon. And now we're going to get into their layers. So we'll start with Tlahupuchi. And it all goes back to research. That's where all of this begins. So when I was doing research for Tlahupuchi, I mentioned how she transforms into Tlahupuchi. And the specifics of that, and it's very specific. She comes into her house, she sets a big roaring fire in the middle of the floor of the house. She has to use specific wood, specific spices, and then she has to walk back and forth in the shape of a cross multiple times, back and forth, back and forth. And when she's done with all of that, she sits on the fire and her legs detach. And then she starts to transform into a bird. So we thought, that's pretty cool. So that's what you're going to see in our first scene. It's called Transformation. Chris felt really strongly that he wanted to give each of these environments like their own unique statement or their own unique twist. So Tlahupuchi's lair has these big talon marks, scratches all over the walls, and it's just filled with bird cages. So there's birds everywhere. As you go a little further into Tlahupuchi's realm, an area we call Los Infantes, or the infants, you start discovering these bassinets. Because one thing I didn't tell you about the Tlahupuchi is she's very particular. She feeds on blood. And she'll drink anyone's blood if she's desperate enough, but she really, really prefers the blood of an infant. That's like the sweetest tasting blood. So there's all these bassinets, but they're all empty. And there's always a moment in Horror Nights, particularly with these houses. Last year with La Llorona, and going back to when we first did it, it was the scene across the river, you know? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? When you get to the town and you have to cross the river and there's the kids floating in the water. But I have to tell you how we did that. Because it's really weird. There's only like 2 inches of water, you know, and that's like pond liner. It's like how you make a koi pond in your backyard. So when we first did this, Chris and I were, and Tony, who's our prop master, we were like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna float these kids? Well, no, we'll cut them in half. Shh. And now this is what I do with my children when they're misbehaving. Put that down, or you're gonna end up in daddy's maze. So this is a scene where you're walking towards another crypt painting of Tlahupuchi, and it disappears, and then you'll see. Let's talk about La Lechuza. So for La Lechuza's lair, again, it goes back to research, right? When I was doing research, and I have to wonder, like, there's got to be somebody in IT by now that looks at my search history, you know, and it's just like, I got a problem. But one of the things I was researching was carnivorous birds' nests. Because there's one thing certain birds do that's really, really messed up. When they kill an animal that they're going to eat, they use their bones to decorate their nest. They like adorn their nest with the bones of their victim. And I thought, that's awesome. La Lechuza's an owl. She's an owl witch. She must have a nest. So we built her a nest. So this is another color elevation of La Lechuza's realm, and you see all of those bones. So her nest is made out of all these found objects, twigs and twigs, sticks and twigs, and the bones of her victims. And what this really speaks to is another member on our team that we want to appreciate and acknowledge today, Tony Lindis. Tony Lindis is our prop master. He heads up a team of talented men and women, and they come from all different walks, you know, working in the industry, film, television, but they come to Horror Nights and work for us year after year after year to do all the props and dressing in our house. And there is a mountain of it, if you can imagine. And a lot of times Tony's team has to just wholly create things, and this is a good example. So I snuck these pictures from our secret offsite facility that you don't know about. And I had to crop this picture too, because if I would have left the whole picture, you would have seen like Chucky, and you can't see that yet. That's a surprise. But these are the bodies that you see in the nest that Tony and his team had to create, and then you see the work they're doing to make these, you know, places where these victims, rotting corpses are being contained. All of that is done by hand. That's all done by our props and dressing team. So give it up for our props and dressing team! Woo! But then we had an idea, and we were like, well, it'd be really cool if you walked into this house and you just saw this giant Lalachusa, like, eating somebody in her nest. So we went to some other individuals on our team. Again, I want to point out these individuals on our team because in the last few years, we have been stepping it up on special effects. And this year, wait till you see what these talented men and women have created. It's insane. David Borning heads up our special effects team. And Paul, who's now going to change his name because I can't pronounce it. I'm going to try Paul. Paul Vasilakos Law? Is that good? Close? What I love about David and Paul is they want to do more than we ask them to do. Like, did you guys go through Scarecrow last year? Okay. Remember that bird that was eating an eyeball on the table and it was like dangling out of his mouth and it was moving around? That was all them. Like, I didn't even write that in the treatment, I don't think. They were just like, hey, we can make a bird. And I was like, do it. So the other individuals that they work with who are a massive, massive help to us and are working on this particular piece is our Universal Studios Hollywood Technical Service Department, the mechanical engineers. These people, I would give them the bow of, you know, wait till you see Chucky. I keep saying that, and I don't want to show you, I just want you to experience it. But they're doing stuff that I never thought we could do with Warheads, like this. So this is a video when we were building the Lalachusa. It's like the T-1000 ectoskeleton for her. The cardboard is a severed, arm/leg, and you can see it's taking a little bite, and its wings are unfurling. And I think in my treatment when I wrote it, it didn't have any of that. And they were just like, hey, we think we can do this, and they did it. And it's amazing. The only problem is I don't know how I'm gonna hide those three guys on set. I have to like throw a sheet over them or something. But they're doing amazing work, and we can't wait to share it with you. All right, El Salon. So now, we've kind of been indoors for a long time. We want to break it up. We want to do a big outdoor scene. So for El Saban, we really wanted to take you to a village, because he typically comes and attacks people, who are leaving a village on the crossroads late at night. So, this goes back to research again. As I was doing research, I came across this, pulquerias. Does anybody know what that is? Or pulque? Yeah. To explain it in American terms, like in the Wild West, this would be the equivalent of like a saloon. This would be a place you go for a drink, maybe some food, some dancing, some gambling, and probably a lot of fights, right? Pulque is an alcohol that's derived from cacti. What I loved about it is that's what it looks like in its pure state, right? It looks like foamy white milk. And I thought, if we combined blood, there was like blood running and foamy white pulque running together, that would be really disgusting. So we decided to create our own pulqueria. And then next door is the carniceria, the butcher shop. So as you head into this pulqueria, we have a scene called Pulqueria Massacre. And basically El Saban has come in and he's just killed every single person in this joint, particularly the womanizers and the drunks. I didn't mention how he kills them though. This is the tweaked part. If you're a drunk, he sucks the alcohol out of their body through their navel.
Ew.
Yeah. I was like, nah. But with womanizers, he rips them apart limb from limb, literally rips the bones out of their body and adds it to his sack that he has his father's bones in. So this is a dead body. Am I kidding? It really is. It's not like it's in my closet or something, as far as you know. No, this is from Body Wars, the touring exhibit that goes around the world. But I needed to know, what is the